Hi there, readers. Welcome to my library. In today's edition of The Book Traveler, we're going to learn about Ben Franklin. You probably know of him as a founding father of the United States, and in school you might have read his autobiography. Today we're going to focus specifically on the years that he lived in London. When I first learned this, I was shocked. I knew he had lived in Paris, but I never knew that he had lived in London. But he actually spent quite a bit of his life there. Benjamin Franklin was born January 17, 1706 in Boston. He had many jobs as he was growing up, including an apprentice printer to his brother. But after printing some things in his brother's papers, including the Silence Dogood letters, he was not so welcome there. Eventually, he moved to London in order to become an apprentice printer there. Before leaving for London, he established an attachment with a woman named Deborah. However, her mother did not want them to get married. She said, "This guy's going to England. He might never come back." She didn't think he was a suitable husband. So Deborah married someone else. Unfortunately, Deborah's husband had a lot of debts and disappeared. It's likely he went to the West Indies, but he was never heard from again. This is the Benjamin Franklin House on Craven Street in London. It's the only home that Ben Franklin lived in that still exists today. It was built in 1706 by a man named Craven, hence the name of it. And just down the street, Herman Melville lived in a home in 1849. Of course, they were not contemporaries, but both authors chose this same road. The Benjamin Franklin home in London has been conserved rather than preserved. There's very little furniture in the house. What's there is period appropriate. However, none of it actually belonged to Ben Franklin. None of that still exists. When you enter the home, you begin by going downstairs to the first floor. At some point, Craven Street was raised, and so the basement floor actually has windows looking up at the street. This room was the kitchen. This panel in the wall was likely where they kept meats and things that needed to stay cool. The stone floors in this house are the originals. They're 6 meters deep. They had to be so deep because the Thames River is nearby. Because Craven Street had been raised, a ladder was built between this floor and the street so that the servants could get up and down and get deliveries. Today, there's a storage area under the road that is actually still used. Franklin became very well known when he lived in London. For one thing, he swam in the Thames River, and at that time people didn't know how to swim, and so many got lessons from Franklin. He had rooms on the entire first floor, which in the United States we would actually call the second floor. Franklin liked to take what he called air baths, and he would sit completely naked on a chair in front of the windows with the windows open and let the air blow over him, and this was how he cleansed himself. He was also known because he didn't drink beer, and that was very unusual. He only drank water. After living in London and working as a printer for a few years, Franklin returned home to the United States. When Franklin returned to the colonies for the first time, he found Deborah Read, and in 1730, because she was already married and could not remarry anyone else, they entered a common law marriage, which lasted the rest of their lives. Franklin had one illegitimate child named William. He never revealed who William's mother was, but he came to live with Benjamin and Deborah. They also had 2 children of their own, Francis, who died when he was 4 years old, and Sarah, who they called Sally. Around 1760, Benjamin Franklin came to London for 16 years, and that's when he lived here on Craven Street. He came without his family, and during that 16 years only went home to visit one time. He was in England in order to negotiate with Parliament to have more freedom for the colonies. The negotiations didn't go as well as Benjamin Franklin had hoped. He had wanted to keep peace with England, but in 1775, after a warrant was put out for his arrest, he fled London, returned to the colonies. He told the leaders in the colonies that peace with England would never happen. A war was the only option. During the 16 years that Franklin lived in this house, his landlady, Margaret Stevenson, and her daughter, Polly, became a second family to him. Polly's husband had a medical school in the home, and in the 1990s, when they were renovating this house, they found bones buried in the backyard that were left from his medical school. After Polly's mother and husband both died, Franklin invited her to come to the colonies with her children and to live there for the rest of her life. As an adult, Franklin's son, William, was made a royal governor in New Jersey. Franklin was very proud of this until the Revolution happened. His son had to flee to England, and they never reconciled. One interesting thing about this home is that it has 17 fireplaces in it. When Franklin lived here, he occupied the entire first floor, what we here in the United States call the second floor. These are swim flippers. This was the very first invention that Benjamin Franklin made when he was only 11 years old. Of course, we know about his kite and the key and discovering electricity. There's a display of that in the home. And finally, there's a harmonium. This is an instrument that Benjamin Franklin invented.
Your finger around them, they would make different noises. So the idea was, he thought, well, it would be much more efficient if I have one long set of glasses. There's a rod in the middle. And for his, you had to either crank it. You had to crank it. So I've just switched ours on. That's why it's turning. Ours is electric.
Here's a few more details from Franklin's life. He was born in Boston and attended school for only 2 years before he worked in his father's candle shop, and then he worked as a printer for the New England Courant. From 1724 to 1726, he went to England for the first time and worked as a printer. This is where he became very well known for swimming in the Thames, probably using those flippers that he had invented as a child. From 1757 to 1755, he lived in London on Craven Street at the house that you can visit today. After the American Revolution, he was elected president of the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Organization, and he worked to help abolish slavery for the rest of his life. Here's a link to the Benjamin Franklin's House's website, which is excellent, and a special thank you to Chris, the tour guide who was there on the day that I visited. Also, a very special thanks to the Lilly Teacher Creativity Fellowship, without whose funding this trip would not have been possible. For this trip, I visited the Franklin House in London, England on Craven Street. Thank you for joining me today for this trip to Ben Franklin's house in London. Keep reading. Bon voyage.